Welcome to the infamous edition of the Headstones and Microphones, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation done through creative storytelling of history's most infamous people. Now, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start at the absolute beginning, where the public narrative hasn't yet distorted who you were. When and where were you born, and what was your given name?
I was born on April 28, 1937, in a small town called Tikrit, up in northern Iraq. My given name was simply Saddam Hussein.
What was your hometown and home life like as a child?
Life back then wasn't easy. I came from a very poor, landless family of farmers. My father disappeared months before I was even born, and then my older brother died of cancer. My mother was deeply depressed, so when I was around 3 years old, I was sent to Baghdad to live with my maternal uncle, Kairala Talfa. Later, my mother remarried, and I went back to live with her and my new stepfather in a tiny mud brick village called Al-Auja, south of Tikrit. But my stepfather didn't care for me, and I faced a lot of harsh treatment from the other children in the village because I didn't have a father.
Was there a story behind your name or a nickname that stuck with you?
My name itself, Saddam, actually means the fighter who stands steadfast, or one who confronts. It was a name that truly defined the course of my entire life, mapping out a path where I refused to accept any limits.
What were you like as a child, and how many years of schooling did you actually attend?
As a young boy, my parents didn't want to send me to school at all, but when I was about 10 years old, my cousin visited us, and I saw that he knew how to read and write. I wanted that for myself. When my family refused, I literally slipped away in the middle of the night and went back to Tikrit to live with my uncle, Kairala, so I could get an education. I finished primary school there and moved with his family to Baghdad in 1955 for high school. I got deeply swept up in political activism before graduating, though later in life, while in exile in Cairo, and even during my time as vice president, I took private law classes. I never actually completed a formal traditional degree.
Was there a specific moment when you realized you were fundamentally different from everyone else?
It was during those early days under my uncle's roof. He had served prison time for fighting against the British, and he would constantly tell me stories of his exploits. Hearing those tales of nationalism while watching the world around me, I realized I wouldn't just accept a quiet, impoverished life. I felt destined to chart a major course in Arab history.
What's a decision that changed everything for you, but felt small at the time?
In 1957, when I was only 20 years old, I made the choice to drop out of my studies and officially join the revolutionary underground Ba'ath Party. At the time, it was just a small group of highly dedicated pan-Arab nationalists, but that single choice completely aligned my fate with the political future of Iraq.
Let's talk about your early run-ins with the law. Before the world knew your name for your most infamous actions, what was your very first arrest or interaction with law enforcement, and what were the consequences?
My first massive interaction with the law came in October 1959. The Ba'ath Party took part in a bold attempt to assassinate the Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Karim Qasim. I was right there on the street during the ambush. The attempt failed, and I actually took a bullet to my own thigh. With the authorities hunting us down, I had to flee the country, escaping first to Syria and then into Egypt. The Iraqi courts actually sentenced me to death in absentia in 1960 while I was living across the border in Cairo.
At what moment did you realize your name would never be forgotten?
It was after the 1968 coup when the Ba'ath Party successfully seized power. I became the vice president and the true muscle behind the regime. By the time I officially assumed the full presidency in 1979, I immediately consolidated power on national television, purging anyone whose loyalty I questioned. At that moment, the entire world knew exactly who was running Iraq.
Did fame make you more dangerous, or did it simply expose who you already were?
Power didn't change my nature. It just gave me the absolute scale to enforce my vision. I always operated under what I called the exceptionalism of revolutionary needs. If someone or something stood in the way of Iraq's progress or my survival, they had to be eliminated violently, without a backward glance. The ultimate power of the presidency simply allowed me to scale those principles nationwide.
Who do you believe betrayed you first? A person, society, or your own instincts?
In the end, it was a profound miscalculation of my international allies. I held a firm faith that countries like France and Russia would prevent a full-scale invasion by the United States because of the massive economic and trade contracts we had secured with them. I trusted that their economic self-interest would protect us. But when the coalition assault came, those diplomatic shields crumbled.
What was your most unique habit or a random fact about you that would surprise people?
People often saw me purely through a lens of military conflict, but I was deeply steeped in history and literature. I considered myself a direct student of great historical Arab leaders, and I spent immense amounts of private time studying the ancient rulers of Mesopotamia to model my leadership after them.
What did the public never understand about the pressure you were under at the time?
The outside world rarely understood the crushing weight of maintaining regional balance. Even when facing severe threats and international inspections, I had to walk an impossible tightrope. I needed to convince the United Nations inspectors that our weapons of mass destruction were gone to lift crippling sanctions, while simultaneously keeping my regional rivals, like Iran, convinced that we still had them so they wouldn't invade us.
Did you have any known rivalries that defined your career?
My most defining regional rivalry was absolutely with Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran. We fought a brutal, devastating 8-year war in the 1980s. Even when things were going terribly and I looked for a way to end the hostilities, Khomeini personally refused any peace terms unless I was completely removed from power. It became an incredibly personal, bitter struggle.
What personal battles were you fighting privately while the world was watching?
Privately, I was fighting against a massive wall of misinformation, largely created by my own inner circle. Because of my reputation for swiftly punishing dissent, I was constantly surrounded by sycophants. My advisors and ministers were terrified to contradict me or give me bad news, meaning I was often making massive geopolitical decisions while completely cut off from the harsh reality on the ground.
What was your darkest moment, and was there ever a time you wanted to walk away from it all?
The darkest period began in 2003, when the coalition forces breached Baghdad. I had to abandon the palaces and go into deep hiding, moving from place to place, completely isolated, while releasing audio recordings to call for resistance. It was a staggering fall, from the heights of absolute authority to running for my life in the shadows.
When the law finally closed in, how exactly were you brought to justice? Walk me through the final arrest, the charges that ultimately stuck, and the legal outcome of your trials.
After months in hiding, I was captured by American forces in December 2003. I was held at a military base until June 2004, when I was handed over to the interim Iraqi government to stand trial before the Iraqi High Tribunal. I faced numerous charges, but the verdict that ultimately sealed my fate was for crimes against humanity regarding a 1982 massacre in the town of Dujail. On November 5, 2006, the court found me guilty and sentenced me to death. My appeals were rejected, and the sentence was carried out when I was executed by hanging on December 30th, 2006.
What's the craziest rumor ever told about you, and what part of your story has been exaggerated the most?
The international media loved to label me as a completely erratic, unpredictable madman. It was a massive exaggeration designed to paint me as entirely unhinged. In reality, my actions were always highly calculated, pragmatic, and entirely predictable if you viewed them through the lens of my own survival and the absolute defense of my regime.
What is the biggest misconception people have about your life?
The biggest misconception was that I was entirely out of touch with my own military reality during the 2003 invasion. People laughed at our information minister's bold claims on television, but the truth is, my inner circle and I genuinely believed our propaganda machine. We honestly expected our forces to mount a heroic resistance that would inflict such heavy losses on the Americans that they would rapidly halt their advance.
What would surprise people most about your ordinary human side?
People might be surprised by how ordinary my daily lifestyle could be when I wasn't playing the role of the grand statesman. Despite the grand palaces, I took pride in simple, traditional Iraqi habits, and when I was hiding out in rural areas near the end, I quickly adapted right back to the basic, rustic conditions of my childhood.
When, where, and how did you pass away?
I passed away on December 30th, 2006, in Kadamia, a neighborhood in northern Baghdad. As mandated by the court sentence, my death was by execution by hanging.
Was your downfall caused more by your own flaws or by the world changing around you?
It was a mix of both, but heavily weighted on how the global political landscape shifted. I operated on the old school rules of regional power and iron-fisted internal control. But when the geopolitical goals of the United States shifted completely toward regime change after the turn of the century, the old strategies of playing foreign powers against one another simply couldn't withstand the sheer force of a global superpower determined to remove me.
Do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to share with the listeners before signing off?
I appreciate the opportunity to speak plainly. History is always written by the victors, and the narrative left behind rarely captures the intricate chess game we were playing on the ground. I ask the listeners to look past the standard headlines and look closely at the complex realities of holding a nation together in the Middle East.
And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast. Remember, do better with the life you have been given and choose to do good in this life. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.